Thank you so much. It's really it's great to be here. It's my first time at DLD, so thank you so much for having me. I am going to take everything up a bit, a level. We've been hearing such great panels on very specific use cases of AI, and now on the outlook on what quantum compute might do. And actually, I'm fearing that this index might need to be called the Global Quantum Compute Index in some years once the commercialization becomes more of a reality, but that's some years out. I will take it up to sort of a macro level because what is happening on the ground essentially is what we are, through the Global AI Index, trying to measure at a national level. And the reason why that is of importance is really for national policymakers and people who are setting the policy and writing the national AI strategies country by country. So we were commissioned back in 2019, just as we were founding Tortoise Media, and we were commissioned by a handful of governments to build this global AI index because many nations around the world were at the time issuing their first national AI strategies and were grappling with the lack of ability to track how their funding and strategy was actually performing and comparing, and also defining what is a national AI ecosystem. So we took a year to build it and released it in the fall of 2019. Actually, Harold here is in the audience. We launched it together in Davos in 2019. And since then, we do, every 6 months we do reviews, but otherwise it releases once a year. But just to take you through the national AI strategies, there were so few back in 2016, 17, and then they started to really mushroom. So that's really the backbone of the index. And what we include here are, we've got about 150 indicators in the index. About 60% of those are in real time. And they cover aspects such as the strength of a talent pool in a nation, what is it really made up of, and is it staying or is it going? We look at infrastructure, operating environment. We look at research, so the strength of the research in a nation, development, government strategy in and of itself. We look at the strength of the strategy and how much public funding there is, but also, of course, the commercial side, which really is speaking to how much investment is put into AI, both across businesses, but also in the AI startup landscape. Of course, no one can read this, but this is just to give you a sense of the number of indicators that go into the index, and we pull from all kinds of both structured and unstructured data sources. So, for example, we will look at GitHub and Stack Overflows. We look at Kaggle. We also look at grassroots activity through hackathons and meetups and so on. A multitude of indicators there that goes in to form what we would say is this mosaic. We use a lot of data points because it's very difficult to get to this one thing with just a handful of data points. So we pull together all these proxies and create this mosaic of data points where there's an emergence of the profile of an ecosystem that emerges. And out of that, this is just a bit more detail on that. Out of that, this emerges, and this is the ranking of the Global AI Index. And we pull together the scores, and we provide a ranking. So maybe not so surprising, what you can see the ranks here, because you would, of course, expect that you've got the US and China up top, and the UK, Canada, and so on following below with. But I guess what we did find quite surprising is back when we did the first round of the index is actually the gap in terms of score between the US and China was actually much larger than we expected, and we did test and got lots of experts out and looked at the data because, of course, one of the concerns one has when doing an index like this is that you're looking at data points, so one size fit all, and it's not always perfect. But nonetheless, the gap between the US and China was much larger than US at 100 and China at around 60, who are much larger than we had expected. But that is because obviously the entirety of the ecosystem may be a lot stronger in the US, whereas there are certain, because it's more of a bottom-up, more active community, it's funded predominantly by the private sector and so on. So you would see elements across the ecosystem that would be stronger in the US, whereas China's more top-down, and we know that story well, and it's more targeted. So of course, on certain aspects of the emerging technology and AI, China would be ahead, but overall, you would find it falling behind. One of the things that, of course, that was back 4 years ago, and that has, of course, changed a lot, and we've seen that gap narrowing quite significantly in our last iteration, and even just when we were looking at the most recent data, that has been narrowing. Of course, with the change in the winds, the geopolitical winds, and the entrenchment, and the changes in policy in China, we'd be keenly following this to see if this may stagnate in certain aspects, and even accelerate China in others. The interesting thing, of course, is, well, it's interesting to watch China and the US, but really where this index gets used a lot is in the smaller countries that have put in place policies over the last couple of years, and we monitor closely those who are either rising quite quickly or falling in the ranking. And we are seeing, which is also probably not so surprising, countries like your Singapore, Israel, Finland, South Korea, that consistently keep rising up the ranking of the global AI index. But actually, and we look back to see what are the reasons why and try and tease out what are potential predictive parts and predictive pieces of the index that can help other countries as best case and use case options for them as they are refining their AI national strategies. What we have seen, of course, as a consequence, as for example, the war in Ukraine, is that the talent that is moving out of Ukraine and into countries such as Serbia and Turkey and Armenia, that these talent pools are now changing, and that will, and we're going to see these knock-on effects in the ecosystems in those countries as well. And then lower down the rankings, perhaps also really interesting to note that countries that may not have had necessarily strong ecosystems but that are rising, maybe because there's a new national strategy or there's a particular company that's moved into that country that then has knock-on effects. And the reason why that's interesting is because we will look for those elements that allow or pushing countries up the ranking to see what we can learn for that. And as many governments are now using the dashboard and the data that's coming out at a very granular level to try and identify what's leading to success, those success stories that we see are really useful for governments to adopt and deploy, or at least look at. One of the interesting things of being based in London is that the UK is always on the cusp of losing its position as third in the index. And it's interesting because it creates a big outcry every time the index comes out, as in we're very close and we need to actually do a bit more than we're doing and not rest on the obviously really, really excellent clusters of academic excellence and a very vibrant startup community. But also we need to harness that and make sure that that stays there. So an index like this does actually highlight where things might be a bit stagnant if they want to remain in the third place. I have only a couple more minutes left, but I want to just point out here is that this is now 4 years in. We've been asked to take a much closer look at what's going on at the corporate level. So later this year, maybe we can launch that new index that's coming, Harold, again, maybe next year, together, is taking a really close look at applied AI or AI maturity at a corporate level. So based on the knowledge and the data team that has been putting this together, we're going to be releasing a corporate AI maturity index by the end of the year, which is a difficult thing to do because a lot of this is not necessarily easy to find because it's maybe not publicly disclosed and so on. But the way that we've been looking at mapping this, we think that, and this will be a public ranking, that this will be interesting to, for the first time, try and place companies, and these would be traditional companies, we'd be looking at banks, we'd be looking at the manufacturing sector, we'll look at transport, we'll be looking at healthcare, and seeing where are companies in the sort of the everything we can glean from public data sources, where are they on their AI maturity journey? How is their investment playing out in terms of, is it efficient? What kind of machine learning sophistication is there? And use cases that are being put into production and so on, and what is actually being able to be traced on the bottom line of companies. So this is what we're going to be working on from June and to be released in the end of the year, starting with the banking sector. So, of course, we would love to hear, any questions or remarks after this session of maybe experience or use cases that you would like to draw my attention to. But I think with that, I'm going to close for now. However, I do think we have 1 or 2 more minutes if there's any questions, because I'm sitting here. Harold, do you have a question?
I don't know if you can hear me. So if you say the blending with corporate innovation in AI, when I look at UK, in my mind, or my easy perception, or limited perception, is maybe that you have Amazon and Google owning DeepMind in UK. So is that now US? Is that really UK? Where does the IP belong to? And does that, if you have 2 corporate from America and Apple moving in with more people and so on, should UK be all the way up down there, or how do you count it, and how do you really say, well, this is a nation? Is it still a nation, or is it just a corporate?
But that's a big question, and actually DeepMind is a partner on this index, and we work very closely with them on precisely this issue. And Demis Hassabis was the first also to point out that this is a problem because this a lot of the innovation that comes out of DeepMind is allocated to the US. So on those specific cases, that is a problem for this. But apart from that, you can, when you look at your ranking of the UK on research in and of itself, it still ranks really strongly. It would be much stronger if that, if the breakthroughs that are coming and the research that is coming out of DeepMind was actually allocated to the UK. So that is one of the key issues, because then the big companies are actually nations in and of themselves and are spanning globally. So where do you attribute all of the research and talent? The talent sits in the UK, but the research and breakthroughs in that case belongs to the US. I love the gong. It's so dramatic. There's one more question. Yeah.
How do you deal with what you don't know, or how much do you know that you don't know?
There's a lot I don't know, generally speaking, but also here. It is. Let me put it this way. Russia is such an interesting. I mean, first of all, when we started out, we've landed on 150 plus indicators. We started out with 550 indicators. So, and some of that was, I wish we had this data, but it's simply too fragmented, or we only have it for Europe, or we only have it, So there's a lot that you have to weed out, and you weed out things that you really, really don't want to weed out. And so that's part of it. So there's a lot that could be in there that, and then there's a question of Russia, which in and of itself is interesting, because that ecosystem is actually, and we've kicked the tires in a lot of conversations with experts in Russia. The issue with Russia is that a lot of their research, because there is a lot, goes through the military. We can't see it.
Alexandra, I'm
yes.
sorry. I have to interrupt you because I'm not teleported right now, maybe soon. Thank you for your insights, and please talk to Alexandra later on. I have to do the introduction for the next session.
I'm going to stay on stage.